Welcome to the Freedom Fridays Project podcast. I'm Pete Clark, your host, the Whispers Guy. It appears that work expands to the time that we give it, and I started to explore how I was investing my time and effort, particularly on Fridays. It's evolved to an exploration and experiment with time, energy, attention and identity, and a mindset shift from I have to I choose to. So if you're interested in exploring some changes to the way that you invest your time and your energy, if you'd like some tips on the way as you make some changes perhaps to your identity, if you would like the freedom of I choose to, away from I have to, then this is the podcast for you. So welcome to the Freedom Fridays Project podcast. So welcome to this week's episode of the Freedom Friday podcast, where I have a very special guest who's got almost an unbelievable story. He's now a mate and a family friend, and our families play together and dinner together. And so, first of all, please welcome Tom.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be here.
How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Looking forward to it.
Good. So, Tom, I start these with the same question. People who tune in to Freedom Fridays know it's about ordinary people having done extraordinary things, moving from I have to I choose to, bringing more life to your years. What's the big change people have gone through that might be instructive for other people going through? So that's the starting question, Tom. What's the big change, or one of the many big changes that you've gone through?
Yeah, well, the change I choose for this one, Pete, is probably the change from being a boy on the farm riding motorbikes through to being an Air Force pilot flying over the skies of Iraq in 2003.
So let me just clarify. You've gone from farm boy to fighter pilot.
Yeah, and
that's a story and a half.
So the span, I guess, from when I left school at the end of 1990 to being over Iraq in 2003, there's 13 years in there. But I guess the journey to actually being a fighter pilot is generally around about 7 years or so for those who go through, the Defence Academy and get a degree. So that was probably where the learning curve was steepest, but it actually didn't slow down for the next 6 either. So okay. it was all a lot of learning, to be honest. Somewhat quite hard.
I bet, which I'm going to pick up in a second. So the farm boy part, what piques the interest of a farm boy to become a fighter pilot?
Good question. I grew up on a farm, loving to ride motorbikes fast, and my parents vetoed my first chosen career of racing motorbikes. That one didn't last more than about 2 dinner conversations.
You didn't increase it and go in the sky.
Yeah, and my second choice of playing tennis for a living, lasted about 4 dinner conversations before that was done. I would have been one of those guys living out of his car and not going anywhere. I think I was never quite that good. So I knew I wanted to do something a little bit different. Dad had always taken us to air shows. I'd grown up, loving aircraft, had a bookshelf full of aircraft books and had memorized all the fighter aircraft from years gone by. And I knew going through school, I didn't want an ordinary job, inverted commas. So I thought joining the Air Force sounded like quite a lot of fun. I didn't know what I was getting into. And in year 11, when I went for a scholarship for year 12, I got hammered. I knew nothing. sent back to have a good look at myself and do a bit of learning before I fronted up in year 12 to actually try and get into the Air Force for real.
And were you joining the Air Force, or were you becoming a fighter pilot?
Joining the Air Force as a general duties officer. So that to the journey from actually getting in there was to being a fighter pilot, there was still plenty of opportunities to fall out of that process. But you joined. We're done our pilot testing, all the aptitude testing, the coordination testing, the psych testing. So we joined, knowing that if we passed every stage, then we would end up being pilots, and then obviously some of us would then get to be fighter pilots. But we joined, just on the promise, wow, having done all the testing.
And is anyone that joins the Air Force, is that their ultimate dream?
For some of us, yes. I mean, the Air Force, or our year at the academy took in navigators, air traffic controllers, supply officers, intelligence officers, administration officers. So, but for 50 of us that joined the academy in 1991, we wanted to be pilots, and we knew that the path ahead of us to get there.
Okay. And of the 1,000 people that might join the Air Force to become a fighter pilot, how many make it?
Well, I understand later on from the work I did in recruiting that for our year of 50 that got into the academy, there was 5,000 applicants. So I think that wow. Realistically, possibly only 1,000 that even passed the academic qualifications, but 5,000 that applied. Let's say 33 of us made it out of the academy.
Wow.
And went on to pilot training. 22 of us graduated from pilot's course with our wings. 6 of us were selected for fast jet training, initially on the old Mackie jet trainer that then got replaced by the Hawks. And then 2 of us finally made it through to F-18s.
2 out of 5,000?
Yeah. nearly 1.
And what fascinates me about that, Tom, and I know, and I'm not asking you because I know you pretty well, you wouldn't want to do this, you wouldn't want to talk about yourself, but why you? Why were you one of the 2 out of 5,000? What differentiates you that the other 4,998 didn't have?
Well, there's certainly a huge element of luck and circumstance in the last couple of years, right? From pilot training, I'd say up to pilot training, plenty of people were still in the race at that stage. And those that didn't make it through the academy sort of realized the Air Force wasn't for them, or couldn't deal with the demands of the academic and military training at the same time. It's just more like a full-on university, really, if I was to describe it like that. Mm. But really, once you get to pilot training, it seems like a long way from your first flight to wings. When you're sitting there, you're not used to wearing an oxygen mask. You're not used to the learning curve. You're not used to the assessment criteria, the fairly blunt feedback on every flight, the necessity to learn every flight from what you did wrong last time, because you could only get it wrong again so many times before that was done, right? So part of it, we used to say when I became a flying instructor later on, that anyone can pass pilot's course if given enough time, right. But it's the steepness of the learning curve and the ability to learn quickly that is as important as actually getting to the required skill level at the end.
So your focus on, the learning aspect, what did you do well? What did you learn? What are you going to change for next time? That was forensic and relentless.
Absolutely. And look, I thought it was tough on pilot's course, but once you got on to fighters, it multiplied again, right. I think, in the intensity, because the requirements, the speeds, the system management, the complexity of the missions multiplies as well. So what's expected of you also multiplies. So, but
which is, as a member of the public, that's quite reassuring. There's not a low barrier to entry.
No, the bar seemed quite high. Although, sometimes later on, even after I got through it, it's like, geez, I'm always felt like I was being pushed, right to the edge and sort of scrambling to keep the head above water. Others did it a bit easier, but certainly I always found that the Air Force was pushing. If it wasn't passing a course, it was then how do you become a lead of 2 aircraft? Once you've done that, how do you become a lead of 4 aircraft? Then how do you lead a large force? Right. Then how do you go and teach other people the same thing? And then how do you take that into a multinational environment? And the learning curve didn't stop.
So it's a speculative question here. Do you think you were born with that willingness to be pushed, or did that experience build that muscle in you?
Good question. I think it's a bit of both. I've always been very competitive. sport-wise. And my parents never actually pushed me. They always noted that, I seemed to have an internal
You're
drive.
doing it yourself.
That's right. So, it is really, I guess I took to flying like it was another competitive sport. Not that I was competing against anybody else, because that's a really bad way to work together as a course, where you're all helping each other to get your wings and to get through, what's a fairly challenging set of circumstances. But certainly competitive within myself to do better each time, to take on the feedback, to make sure that I addressed what was going on and did better next time. I think that's partly innate, but is certainly drilled in as, it's a requirement for success. You're not going to be a fighter pilot unless you have that.
Yeah. And what part of your farm boy existence, you've got farm boy identity, helped or hindered your way through?
That's a really good question. Later on, after I'd been a fighter pilot for a few years, I did some work with Air Force recruiting, and at that stage, that they had a theme going that they were looking for left-handed farm boys, because apparently they were going to make good fighter pilots. And part of the rationale behind that, I think, there was a bit of the left brain, right brain thing going on there. But I think on the farm, that was the left-handed thing, I think.
Yeah.
But on the other side, I think they looked at farm boys who are used to being reasonably, and girls, farm boys and girls, as being more, I guess, resilient, autonomous, able to just get on and get stuff done, don't require a lot of attention, I guess, and would just, more absorbent potentially than others. But I'm not actually sure whether that was the case. I think it was a fine theory from some psychologists, but when I looked around the squadron, I was the only left-handed farm boy there. And by the way, I certainly was far from being the best. I was probably the worst pilot in the squadron. So I'm not sure if we're looking for the right things here, guys. But I think that background, certainly being comfortable with machinery and having operated cars, motorbikes, and tractors since I could look over the windscreen was certainly helpful, I think, in understanding and operating machinery.
And how many times through that journey, maybe even out loud, did you say to yourself, "I'm done. I've had enough. I can't. This is a bit too far"?
Well, there was certainly plenty of times when I came back from a flight, I went, "Okay, failed that one." Definitely did not pass that flight.
Yeah.
And you can recognize some of the things you might do to actually get to that stage. But I never actually counted myself out of failing the course. Right? It's like, okay. There was a few flights I thought I'd failed where I actually just got given a marginal score instead, by the skin of my teeth, because I think they saw enough that maybe what should have been catastrophic for the flight wasn't. But there were a couple of times probably on when I was flying F-18s where I thought, this is so hard. There's aircraft flying around everywhere, and I do not know what to do in this circumstance. And that was pretty obvious to the instructor, I think. And so you just go, how the hell am I going to get this? I understand the theory, I understand the brief on where I'm supposed to be going, what I'm doing, but it is just so hard to comprehend when you're airborne. So, there's probably a couple of times there. It's like, well, you just got to, each night you take the feedback, right, I've got to focus on these 3 things tomorrow that I screwed up today. And, if I do those, maybe they'll let me go through. If I deal with the big issues that I had yesterday, there might be some other issues, but as long as I deal with the ones I did yesterday, maybe they'll give me another chance. And, they did, which I was pretty lucky.
Yeah. I can't even begin to imagine what that is like, dealing with the chaos and complexity that you had to deal with in a multi-billion-dollar piece of government kit, flying at X number of 100 kilometers an hour, and you've never done it before. That is just the ultimate in working in a VUCA environment.
Yeah, it really is. And I will say that paid multi-billion-dollar. It's probably a $40 million aircraft. The Joint Strike Fighter, the F-35, is a lot more expensive, but it's still $40,000 an hour of taxpayers' money that you're burning on the training as well, which is why I think partially we take it so seriously to get the most out of every hour. But But that VUCA environment, I guess, it's interesting because people think of the military as being quite regimented, and we do a lot of drills and we do repetitive training, and we train and we train and we train. But it's actually that structure that enables you to make order out of chaos in a VUCA environment. So when having never been in the Middle East before, in thunderstorms and going over into enemy territory and having to find tankers in bad weather and sandstorms and chaos on the ground, it's actually that training that actually gives you that capability to operate in a chaotic environment. It actually gives you flexibility because you train for options and you have choices.
We're recording this in Australia, and on the telly at the moment, there's, it's an entertainment show, really, SAS Australia, where they take celebrities through a supposed SAS training camp, which I'm interested. I love the psychology of it. I'm going to guess that most people's only experience of fighter pilots would be Top Gun.
Yeah, that's pretty disappointing.
Based on the actual experience, what percentage is the real experience versus what we might know of Top Gun?
Well, I hope Top Gun 2 does a better job of displaying what happens, and I hear it does. By the way, from closer to the movie than I think they've got a little bit more realism in it this time, and but there's certainly the tactics. There's a lot of rubbish in there.
Yeah.
I'm making no
connection between Tom Cruise and Tom Gleeson here at all.
Definitely not. A few personality differences there.
And that was a long time ago. People, I think, who've gone through quite extreme experiences like that, there's a blessing and a curse as they come out. What's, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what's been the blessing of that for you post 03, and yet what's the curse?
Well, so I think the blessing is that people, the blessing is that people have assumptions about what you like because of what you've done, and the curse is people have assumptions about what you like because of what you've done, right?
Good answer.
And the blessing is that people understand that you can learn fast, you operate, in a stressful environment. You've led people, you can work in teams, you can solve complex problems, and that's fantastic. And also, to be honest, having that on the CV does actually, provide a point of differentiation in a pile of resumes. I think the curse side, I certainly found on the MBA there, I had a few people that assumed that I would be a stereotypical, I don't know, more of a sergeant major type, I think, shouting and screaming and being inflexible and yelling at people and telling them what to do. And so that took a little bit
that's just with your kids.
That's right. But look, what else about it? What's the curse? I think
are there any maybe a different question? Are there any maxims that you used to have to live by as a fighter pilot that you still do or don't anymore?
The 7 Ps is something that I still use and talk to all my teams about, rather. And the 7 Ps are prior preparation and planning prevents piss poor performance. Right? There's if you walk into an environment, a mission where you haven't thought about what might happen, you haven't got contingencies, you don't know who's going what and what the where the accountabilities and the roles and responsibilities are, then you can expect some trouble on those fronts. So being prepared is certainly very helpful.
You got to do the work.
You got to do the work. It doesn't matter what it is. And I think also the plan, brief, execute, debrief. This has been codified by a company called Afterburner, right? It's a flawless execution cycle, and teams are into this cycle, and it's part to do with the 7 Ps, right? That's the first part. Yeah. But then before you actually go into whether it be a client meeting, whether it be a pitch of some sort, brief everyone in. If you've got 4 people in there, here's the roles you're going to play. Reminder, here's what we're doing. Here's what a successful outcome looks like, right? Brief everyone in just before you go into the meeting, and then, execute the meeting per the plan. And then at the end, what did we learn out of that? What went well? What didn't go well? How are we going to take that away and make sure that others do, and we do a better job next time? It's that type of continual learning that I think is, applicable anywhere.
And it seems like, the corporates that you and I both work with, we try and overcomplicate things despite wanting to simplify. And yet what I've just heard you say is that's the flawless execution of the simple things. Absolutely.
Trying to make things simpler is always, a good idea. To be honest, sometimes, fighter pilots did an awful job of that, debriefing a junior pilot on a particular dogfighting mission that lasted 40 minutes and debriefing for 3 or 4 hours. In hindsight, probably wasn't that helpful. It was thorough, certainly. But, if, realistic limitations of any human being is taken away maybe 3 to 5 major points to sort out for the next mission, not 45.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, I'm conscious of your time. I know you've got a deadline. So first of all, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm going to finish with a couple of either or questions for you that might catch you on the hop a little bit. So are you a sunrise or a sunset guy?
Sunrise.
Your favorite Top Gun character?
Viper.
Your least favorite Top Gun character?
Slider.
Slider, you stink.
Stinks.
Something you wish you knew when you were younger?
Empathy.
And a book that's changed your life?
Team of Teams.
Tom, thank you so much.
Thanks, Pete.